On the north coast of Devon, just before the Valley of the Rocks, there lies a small seaside town named Lynmouth, and not far from there is a place called Challacoombe Common. It's always been a strange and eerie place, dotted as it is with tumuli and barrows holding the remains of the ancient dead, interspersed with hillocks where sleeping dragons were once said to rest. About 400 years ago, back when royalist and parliamentarian were fighting over their visions of England's future, there lived a simple labouring man who had saved up just enough money to build himself a small house. As was common in those days, he supplemented the stone he had bought for the job with those taken from ancient ruins and monasteries that had suffered the last King Henry's displeasure. Had he simply continued looting these sites, this story would have a swift and happy conclusion, but of course, if that were the case, I wouldn't be telling this tale. Eventually, his search for stone and gravel led him to a memorial that would later become known as the Broken Barrow. He spent most of the morning digging deeper and deeper within it, finding nothing but soil and sand until eventually his spade struck the roof of a large walled chamber made of strong stone blocks. Ecstatic at his discovery, he began hauling them out, arranging each one tidily before descending for the next. Once he had managed to remove a good portion of them, he was presented with another treasure, a fine clay pot, finished with a red glaze and decorated with intricate swirls. It was fragile to the touch and couldn't be removed whole, but if there was one treasure, he reasoned, there must be more. He'd heard stories about the old ones ever since he was a boy, and knew that their kings were often buried with gold, silver and other precious things. Poor as he was, even the smallest speck of gold would mean the world to him, so he dug deeper and deeper. But as he did, he heard the sound of horses' hooves approaching. Panicked by the prospect of a trampling by the feral ponies that lived on the moor, he bolted up and searched for the herd he was sure was almost upon him. However, upon looking he saw none. There wasn't a sign of them. No hoof prints, no upturned earth, not even a distant whinnying. So he descended to his work once more, and once more he heard the hooves. Once more he bolted up, and once more he saw nothing. 3 times this happened, and 3 times he was left perplexed. After the 3rd visit from the phantom hooves, he took up his work again, and after a moment's digging, saw bones beneath his feet. They weren't the bones of a king surrounded by wealth, or even those of a grown man accompanied by the simple tools he used in life. Instead, it was the skeleton of a small child, clasping a simple bone whistle. Enraged and disappointed, the man snatched the whistle from the child's hands, left the hole unfilled and returned to his half-built house. There he spent the evening drowning his frustrations in a sea of ale, and so when he woke up the next morning to find that his eyes were foggy and his ears rang, he assumed he was simply hungover. However, over the next week his vision did not clear, and his ears did not settle. In fact, both got worse. By the end of the 2nd week he could hardly see his hand in front of his face. So, as doctors were a rarity on Exmoor at the time, he sent for one of the cunning folk. The cunning folk were a rare bunch. They were healers, storytellers and soothsayers, skilled in divination as well as the lifting of curses. More ignorant folk often called them witches, but those who knew the land knew better. It took the cunning woman 2 days to arrive, and for 2 more she used every potion, incantation and appeal to find the source of the curse, but always in vain. Until one day when a clear sky invited her to look up towards the hill, and she saw the barrow that had been defiled. The cause of the curse became clear then, as did its solution. The spirits of the dead were displeased, and they were taking their revenge. The only solution was to make amends, to return to the barrow with offerings of food and ale, place them in the hole that he had dug, and refill it with all due reverence and ceremony. The man readily agreed, and even in his weakened state took great care to do what was needed. But alas, it was all for nothing. In the weeks that followed, the man developed a melting fever, then a terrible rash. Then his insides just seemed to melt and began dripping from every orifice. Eventually, after a month of this torture, he finally died, and as he had no family, it became the responsibility of the local church to settle his affairs. So, in order to fund the modest funeral they had arranged, they searched his house for what little wealth they could find. There wasn't much, though. Just a few coins, some dented pewter. Oh, and an ancient bone whistle that had fallen under his bed. It was a shame, really. He tried to make amends, but what child is ever satisfied with food and drink when all they really want is their favourite toy? Word of advice: if you're ever on Exmoor and you hear the sound of hooves but see no horses, have a think about what you're doing. The dead might just be giving you a warning.